I want to start just by saying thank you to the Mayor's Innovation Project for having me here, and it's such an honor to be joining the three mayors that we have on this panel today, and everyone here in this room. I was just counting as we were going around, and I think we have 8 mayors or other city staff who are representing cities that are in the Welcoming America Network. And that's very exciting because I think it's an indicator of a trend that I want to talk more about today, which is the growing movement of mayors and other city leaders around this issue of immigration. It's also very exciting to me, as I was coming over here, I was thinking about a very personal story in my own life. I come from a family of immigrants. My grandmother was a small business owner, and in the 1980s she moved her business from Brooklyn, New York to Frederick, Maryland, which is a small city just up the road here in Maryland. And I will never forget the day that the mayor came out to cut the ribbon as she opened the store. It was a big deal for our family, it was a big deal for me, but it was a really big deal for my grandmother to be honored in that way by the mayor visiting her. And I think about that day because I think for my grandmother that was a day when she not only felt very proud to be opening her business, but as an immigrant she felt proud to be a newcomer in that city and felt like an American. And I think that is the power of mayors at a time when so many Americans in our country are being told that they are not Americans in many ways. So I want to thank you for all that you're doing to send that message. And I hope we can have a very frank conversation today about what more we can all be doing to create communities where everyone, immigrants, but also longstanding residents, feels like they are welcome. I want to just do a quick poll. How many of you are in a community that has changed demographically in the last 20 or 30 years? Okay, we are not alone. I hope that proves that. We're living at a time when more than ever people are on the move globally. And whether they are moving because of economic reasons or because they are being forced to flee, the fact remains that people are moving, and that fact is only likely to grow. We live at a time of a growing global economy. That will drive people. Climate change is likely to be driving people. So people are going to continue to move. Demographic change is just a fact. What isn't a fact is how communities are responding to that change. And that's where your leadership comes in, and where you can be thinking about ways for your community to respond either from a place of fear, or maybe just ambivalence, or what we have seen all over the country, which is communities responding from a place of real resilience. And I want to start by just talking a little bit about why we've seen some of that resilience. We've seen it because as much as this issue is a moral issue, it's also a very pragmatic issue. And that's because every city in this country and around the world, whether they realize it or not, is competing. Is competing for people, is competing for talent, is competing to attract and retain people of all skill levels, and being a more welcoming place gives them a leg up in that competition. But it's also a very practical matter because at the end of the day, a community of neighbors is stronger than a community of strangers. And we learned that lesson at Welcoming America in the very first community we were working in, which was the city of Nashville, Tennessee. Now about 10 years ago, the city of Nashville, Tennessee, like many other places all over the country, had seen a rapid demographic shift. It happened very quickly, and the response was not all that positive. In fact, at the time, the city was being called the epicenter of a nativist backlash against immigrants, something that probably sounds very familiar today. Welcoming Tennessee was an initiative that got started to really deal with that climate and was successful in turning it around and moving Nashville on a better course to where it is today, which is actually one of the more welcoming cities in the country. And what got them there was a recognition that oftentimes when immigrants come to a community, the default is really to be providing them with services, to be thinking about how immigrants are adapting. But the missing piece is so often, and was certainly the case in Nashville, Tennessee, the missing piece was a real effort to bring along people who'd lived in the community all their lives and had seen that it was changing. And what they discovered was when they launched an effort to really bring along the broader receiving community, the longtime residents, and make them feel welcome during that process of change as well, really opened up a new conversation and helped move the city to a different place. Today, the city is one of a number around the country, and Baltimore is another great example of this, that has an Office of New Americans, which is a best practice model that I know we'll talk more about, and is doing a number of things like the My City Academy, which helps bring both immigrants and also non-immigrants from the community into city government to help them understand how it works better, to develop their leadership skills, but also to help people within city government meet new Americans in the city of Nashville. Now, one of the other things that we discovered, in addition to the fact that it was important to not only focus on immigrants, but also longtime residents in the city of Nashville, was that it turned out that being a welcoming place was actually really good for the economics of Nashville. By 2012, Nashville was leading the country in job growth, and of course immigrants didn't create that, but if you go and talk to business and civic leaders in the city of Nashville, they will tell you that that change couldn't have happened if the city hadn't made an intentional tack toward being a more welcoming place. And that makes sense when you think about the fact that there were international businesses that were coming there, and they were getting concerned, did we make the right choice to come to the city of Nashville? Our employees, kids are getting bullied in school, their spouses are getting dirty looks in the street. Maybe this wasn't such a wise idea. We partnered with the Nashville Chamber of Commerce a few years ago to actually go out and survey residents in Nashville, and what they found really affirmed this, that the efforts that Nashville made really created tangible economic gains across the city, and over 80% of business leaders felt that, for example, immigrants have helped businesses to reach a more global audience. So it was the right thing to do, but it was also the smart thing to do for the bottom line of Nashville to be a more welcoming place. Another city that I think has served in many ways as a beacon within the welcoming movement is the city of Dayton, Ohio. In 2011, right in the midst of Arizona Show Me Your Papers laws and a lot of efforts around the country to really expel immigrants, Dayton decided to take a different approach. They said, what can we do as a community to welcome immigrants here, to really make this a place that's desirable for everyone? And so the city brought together leaders from across the community, civic leaders, business leaders, philanthropic leaders, and they created a plan looking at all the things that the city and the community as a whole could do through a public-private partnership to reduce the barriers that newcomers face to full participation, civically, socially, economically. Things like making it easier for people to learn English, things like working in the schools to help newcomer kids and kids that grew up in the community to build bridges, things like lifting up a more positive message about immigrants in Dayton, working to make it easier to open small business or buy a home in the city. And the exciting thing about the work of Welcome Dayton is that the city had been seeing about 50 years of population decline. And in the last couple of years, they've actually been able to turn that around. So it's a city that is now seeing more new businesses, just like my grandmother's, open on Main Street. And they're also seeing people buying up new homes and a lot of economic revitalization. Dayton, Ohio is also the first to become, we just launched a program called Certified Welcoming. They're the first city in the country to be certified as welcoming. And that's helping them to continue this trend. So they've been using that seal with their Chamber of Commerce and with their Economic Development Agency to really continue to be able to promote the fact that they're a welcoming place. Not just to businesses, but also to residents there, because what we know is that people value living in places that are welcoming and where they feel like they belong. And in fact, a couple of years ago, the Knight Foundation did a survey called Soul of the Community, where they looked at close to 30 cities of varying sizes across the US, and they asked residents there to identify the top 3 things that they wanted in a city, what really attached them to a place. And among the 3 things that they identified, the openness of a community was among the top 3, and they've been able now to show that places that offer that openness and aesthetics and community spaces, which were the other two, are places that also have higher GDP. So I mentioned earlier, this is a trend that is now growing. We started with about 10 cities, and we're now at a place where about 1 in 8 Americans lives in a community in the Welcoming America network. So despite the vitriol you may be hearing from Washington, in communities it's quite a different story. And these are communities all over the country in a variety of different political contexts, geographic contexts, from Anchorage, Alaska to Atlanta, Georgia, across the middle part of the country, small towns, rural communities. And what we've seen is that communities are not only standing up to say we want to be welcoming in a symbolic way, but they're actually putting in place tangible policies that make their communities more inclusive. And some of the key things that we've seen just in the last couple of years is a growth in the number of offices or individuals within the city government who are responsible for this issue. So that is really key. This is 30, but actually I think we're up to 35 now. And a number of communities are also, similar to Dayton, developing comprehensive plans that bring together stakeholders to really create the buy-in and the support and the leverage to make their communities better. Welcoming America exists as support to both foment this movement, but also to really support it on a practical level. With a network, with tools, with training, technical assistance, with validation. But one of the things that we have recently put out is something that we call the Welcoming Standard, which looks across the various areas that we think are most important for making sure that communities are truly welcoming ones, and helping city leaders understand where those investments most make sense, and what some of the most common policies are that we've seen to be effective. But we also fundamentally believe that to create a welcoming community really starts with a conversation within a community. So often there are great efforts happening already, and it's often the case that there has not been an effort to really tie together maybe groups that are working specifically with refugees, with organizations that are serving another niche immigrant population, with businesses that are interested in figuring out how they can better support their workforce. So we've seen a number of communities all over the country, and you'll hear more about Grand Forks and also Baltimore as well, who've created their own roadmap for change. This happens to be the Welcoming Pittsburgh plan. I know I only have a couple of minutes, so I'll maybe weave some of these ideas into our discussion afterwards. But in Nashville and across the country, whether communities are at a place of sort of tolerance and looking to see what they can do to make their communities more actively welcoming, or if they're starting from a place where there's a lot of polarization and tension in the community, there are three very simple things that we've seen help to create a more welcoming climate overall. The first is about leadership, both bringing together leaders to create a more welcoming community through one of these plans that I talked about, but also even on a more basic level, identifying leaders from the community who can be a voice for this issue, a trusted voice for this issue. So much of the information we receive about immigration comes from outside of our communities. So bringing people forward who really are trusted community leaders, and also representative of the diversity of your communities to make sure that they are leading the conversation. This is very basic, but in communities that are changing, it's often the case that newcomers and longtime residents so rarely come into contact with one another. And so creating opportunities to really find common ground, whether it's over a meal or on the soccer pitch, or as parents in a school, can begin to help people overcome some of these misunderstandings that are so often prevalent around this issue. And lastly, communications. And I'm sorry, Mayor Friendly, that this is Cleveland and not Cincinnati, because I think Cincinnati's been doing a super job around its communications. But we've seen, and particularly the Voice of Mayors on this, telling a new story about who immigrants are in the community, and showing why the benefit to all residents and creating a more inclusive community for everyone. So I'm going to leave it here at this slide and look forward to your questions.